Hi, a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the room and welcome to Project Vocal's 7th program, The Truth Behind Youths in the Decision-Making Process in conjunction with iGEM 2021. My name is Shakil and I'll be your moderator for the day. Just wanted to let you know that this program is fueled by the Global Environment Facilities Small Grants Program of UNDP, and it's led by EcoKnights. So just a few housekeeping rules that I wanted to share with all of you. First and foremost, this session will be recorded and published on our website as well as social media. So if you do not want to be featured, you may have your cameras turned off. Also, please have yourself muted during the call at all times, so as to not disturb the ongoing discussion. For vocalist members who are tuning in today, kindly rename your profile account according to your name so we can identify you as attendees to this dialogue. Finally, all questions during the Q&A session are to be sent via the chat box and will be addressed during the live Q&A later. I wanted to mention as well, there will be a quick photography session before the program ends, so everyone is welcome to participate and turn on their camera. Everyone who has participated here will receive an e-certification. So that's the house rules. Moving on to the speakers themselves. First and foremost, I wanted to introduce Dr. Renat to the virtual stage, who will be giving us a roughly 10-minute presentation. So Dr. Renat Siu is a climate change and sustainability advisor to CENT-GPS. He is responsible for the advancement of the organization's work in the field of climate change and sustainability. And he is also a founder for Accelerating Climate Action, which is an initiative that focuses on funding entrepreneurs who want to do climate action work. So Dr. Renat has served as co-chair of the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Working Committee and UNFI's Collective Commitment on Climate Action. In 2020, he was appointed an SDG champion under climate action by the World Economic Forum. A member of the WEF Expert Network Group, he serves on the WEF Global Future Council, a community champion for Southeast Asia, and a global lead for the Global Shapers Climate and Environment Steering Committee. Dr. Renat has been involved in the implementation of the sustainability agenda for a number of public listed corporations, and he was a postdoctoral fellow and researcher at the Center for Energy and Environment Markets, contributing thought leadership in several areas, from sustainability and integrated reporting all the way to sustainable construction for the building and infrastructure sector. Everyone, welcome me in joining Dr. Renat Siu to the virtual stage. Dr. Renat, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Shakil, for the very kind introduction, and hello to the panelists that we have today. As Shakil has mentioned in the introduction, I do have quite a number of roles that I'm involved with in the climate change space. But perhaps what I'll do is that I'll just share a little bit about why I got interested in this space to begin with. I think when I was a youth, like a teenager, in fact, like I've always asked myself, like 3 key questions. Like number one, like, do we need to change, right? So if you look at the world around us with, all of the facts, figures, reports that have been surfacing in the media, almost on a daily or even weekly basis, you can see that we are living in a state of emergency. And I'm not just talking about COVID-19, of course, but we're talking about the climate crisis, which is very much real. It's very present. And it's not just happening across the globe, but even in our own backyards. We are looking at floods, right, that has been hitting in both the northern, southern regions, parts of Malaysia. People have to evacuate. People's lives are clearly affected as a result of that. And of course, having said so, I too was once a flood victim myself. Like, having gone through that sort of experience, it's something that I've never really want anyone to have to go through ever again. And hence, like at a very young age, I've always had this question that, something needs to change, especially given the fact that we all know that climate change is man-made, or in more technical terms, we call it anthropogenic. it is caused by, our human activities, our industrial activities, from mining, and just being involved in things like exploration of oil and gas, for example. All of this needs to change. The second question that I had for myself was, can we change? Given all that has happened, given the fact that we know that, climate change is man-made, we can put a stop to this. And this is also a message of hope. Despite all the circumstances that we live in, despite all the scary statistics that we've been hearing, there is also still hope. We've seen the US, for example, rejoining the Paris Agreement. Leaders really stepping up to the plate. We have seen political leaders, right, making really strong strides and commitments to wanting to be carbon neutral, not just in Singapore, but in China. And of course, my hope is, of course, to also see, Malaysia, stepping up to the plate one of these days and making that strong commitment as well. We have seen growth in the renewable energy sector, solar, wind, picking up at a pace even faster than we can ever imagine. Even in small rural areas, there have been huge strides in innovations, pay-as-you-go solar systems that have been implemented, in small villages in parts of Nairobi, in Kenya. And all of this really speaks to, the human ingenuity. If we put our minds and thoughts to wanting to innovate and make a change in this area, anything that's truly possible. Which leads me to, I guess, the third question that I had was around willingness. We know that we need to change, we know that we can change, but a key question is, are we willing to make that change? And what I would say is that based on my observations and engagements with all of these different stakeholder groups that I'm involved in, regardless of whether it's at an international or national level, one of the things that I've seen most consistent with is actually the power of youths. And I always say this, right? And perhaps, people who have been following me on social media have probably been seeing me quoting this over and over again, but I feel that it's so true and real that, some people say that youths are the leaders of tomorrow, but, I always back to defer and say that they are actually the leaders of today. If you look at some of the most innovative projects that, have been run all across the globe, they are literally driven by youths. And one area that I'm particularly, really, affiliated with is actually this project that I run called Accelerating Climate Action, which seeks to actually fund startups that, have a role in not just advocating, talking about, the importance of climate change, but also translating that level of awareness into action. What can people actually do, right, on the ground, right, to really innovate, to mitigate, the impacts of climate change, or even help us adapt, right, to the challenges that we're facing. And once again, a lot of these different innovations are from youth groups. And I feel there is something to be said about, the education system as well. That, it really takes a whole village, a whole group of different stakeholders, not just governments, educators, people in the corporate sector, civil society organizations. We all have to partner and work closely together if there is any hope, right, of actually, putting a dent or making a change in this space. And I guess I'll just leave it there, and I'll, look forward to our conversation and dialogue on how, youths can be involved in the decision-making process, which is really the theme of today's panel. Back to you, Shakir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Renat, for that very insightful sharing. I believe a lot of us have many things to learn from you, and I'm hoping we can have that interaction sooner or later. Moving on to our second speaker, who is Emily Oi, who is a climate policy analyst with the Malaysian Green Tech and Climate Change Center. So Emily specializes in advising as well as consulting climate actions under, as I mentioned, MGTC, a government agency under the purview of Ministry of Environment and Water, short for CASTA. So Emily is experienced in corporate sustainability advisory, sustainability strategy formulation, as well as reporting framework for Malaysian public listed companies, spanning across power and utilities, plantations, properties, and other sectors. Prior to MGTC, Emily was attached to Ernst & Young Malaysia's Climate Change and Sustainability Services Advisory Team, as well as YTL Corporation Berhad's Group Sustainability Division. She was part of the Malaysian Youth Delegation in various capacities, ranging from mentoring, managing, and training the delegation on UNFCCC climate negotiations, as well as climate policy communications. Emily also attended COP21 as a youth civil society organization representative. Emily, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shakil. It's great to be here this afternoon with all of you. Very good afternoon to everybody. So my name is Emily. So I'm going to just briefly share about my personal journey in this climate change sphere. So as Shakil have introduced briefly, I started off pretty much 5-6 years ago, really in the space. But I get this question a lot. People ask me, how did you get interested in environment or climate change cause at the first place? And I can't really recall the one sparking moment, but I do recall that during my secondary school time, as cliche as it sounds, my biology teacher always shared videos about polar bears suffering and then ice melting. Sometimes we just thought these small actions doesn't really have any impact to the audiences, but it does have an impact to me. And that is kind of life-changing because it has, made me started to think, why are we treating our Earth this way? And we are relying so much on our ecosystem services, such as basic as air and water, but we're not treasuring it. So I think that get me started in this journey. So I guess over the 5-6 years, I have been jumping around in different sectors, in the sense that I started off with the Malaysian Youth Delegation, MYD, which Shakil is also part of it. So this is actually a youth or NGO, first of its kind in Malaysia, that specializes in climate policy and education. So I was pretty new to it in the sense that although my education background is kind of in environmental sciences and management, but climate change itself is such a huge topic, and it's like a brand new world if you really delve into it. I believe Dr. Renat or even Celine later can tell the audience a little bit how vast this entire topic is. So when I was in this NGO sphere, I used to have this really kind of extreme view that why are these private sectors being such a bad guy? They're polluting and they should pay for it. And I really think that, the advocacy should be really strong on it. But I changed this view after I came back from COP21 in Paris. That's where the Paris Agreement got adopted. Why? Because during the conference, I noticed, yes, they might be polluting, but they are also the organizations that hold most of the global resources in the country or internationally. So we can't exclude anyone, including the private sectors, to solve this urgent matter, and they could actually be the catalyst of it. So I've noticed the shift of conversation over these few years, especially in the Malaysia context. Few years recently, there's so many more private companies that are coming on board to talk about this thing, and they're actually moving faster than before. So and that's where I started to move from the NGO sphere and then start to explore the private sector. How is it like working with them? And I've been with them about 2-3 years, and that gave me another perspective of how things work in the private sector. Yes, that might be very profit driven, but there are also companies who are really sincere and really want to be part of the solution, and that changed my view about things, because we can't conclude that everybody is a bad guy in this huge problem. Everybody have their own role to play, and as per Dr. Renat mentioned before, this require all of a nation and whole of society approach to solve it because we have simply no time to waste anymore. So then it brings me to my recent experience, which is with the government side of things. I have been with the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Centre since last year. I joined during the pandemic, so I've been working from home since then. But that doesn't, discount my experience engaging with various government stakeholders. It's really eye-opening in the sense that I get to, familiarize myself and engage with various federal ministries down to the state government and even the local councils. So they are all very diverse stakeholders, and when you listen to each of them, they have very different concerns or issues or even challenges in terms of implementing climate solutions in their respective portfolio. So it is not straightforward. So I think what I've learned throughout this journey is that if you really want to be a solution in this huge problem, you have to educate yourself and learn yourself to understand this entire system. And one thing about youth is that, I have never noticed myself being a youth is like a special group or a special community in this global conversation. So I think don't stop yourself from being part of the solution, although you are a youth. That shouldn't be a obstacle for you to move forward. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that sharing, Emily. It's really insightful to hear from someone who's actually been part of the COP process in Paris in 2015. It's really inspiring stuff. So moving on to our final speaker, Celine. I would like to welcome you to the virtual stage as well.
Thank you.
Celine is a conservation biologist, and she is actually a youth vocalist. Currently, she is doing her master's research at USM, focusing on University Science Malaysia, focusing on infectious disease in non-human primates, and is leading the rehabilitation, restoration, and conservation pillar of the environmental NGO, EcoKnights. Her passion for science had led her to a unique opportunity to be part of the international conferences on tropical sciences, contributions to sustainability, under the Mahadi Science Award Foundation. Celine has attended the UNDP Asia Pacific Regional Dialogue on Youth Empowerment in Climate Actions as a Youth Environmental Organization delegate from Malaysia. She has also mentored youths formally and informally on ways to address environmental issues within their community. And prior to joining EcoKnights, she was one of the awardees in the Roots and Shoots Malaysia Award 2020, where she worked on various wildlife conservation projects. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Celine to deliver her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shakil. First of all, it's an honor to be here together with these environmental leaders doing their amazing work, Dr. Reynard, Emily, and Shakil as well. Yeah, today I'm mostly just going to share my experience on from the grassroots level, basically how I started this whole journey to work on environmental actions and mostly focusing on biodiversity conservation. So yeah, it's basically on how to be a change maker for you. So here are my slides. Let's move to the next slide. So how it all started is, next slide please. How it all started is 5 years ago, I got this opportunity to study in University Malaysia Sabah. Back in the days, I wasn't very having that environmental conscious inside me. Basically, when I first stepped into Sabah, I felt so fascinated by the biodiversity we have in Malaysia. Everything is so beautiful. That's why it got me that kind of passion, wanting to do more. Well, and also I got my degree is conservation biology, so I get this experience in different places around Sabah doing the field works and also doing some research. And here are some of the beautiful places. I was very inclined towards this marine conservation because Sabah is filled with a lot of islands. And at the same time, what I noticed is this issues going on. While I'm also things like pollution, how mass tourism industry that has been destroying the habitats in Sabah. So moving on to the next slide. here's to share. When I started, I was with Isaac. Isaac is actually a global volunteering organization. Back then, I have been very inclined towards the sustainable development goals, where how people, environment, and economy comes together to build a balance to make sure our resources are sustainably managed. This is why back then I started several projects on quality education, because for me, I think education is really the most important way to start up something that built in that kind of awareness. And moving on, when I was like having that question, asking myself, so I'm having this experience, having the studies on conservation biology, and I really want to get this message out, getting more people to be empowered, taking actions towards environmental actions. Therefore, I started this project called Nature Warrior. It's a marine conservation project where it focuses on life below water, and ultimately we are pushing towards climate actions. So back then, how I realized is there are issues like this ocean pollutions going on in there, and then this project Nature Warrior basically gets we have volunteers that come in for 6 weeks started their journey, and they work on starting from mangrove conservation, and also ocean. We have those coral planting activities going on. These are the things that I feel is really important to let everyone know that nature, all the ecosystem are really connected together. So yeah, that's the thing that I want to share. When I come back to Penang, 4 years later, I started to work with different organizations around Penang, and the pandemic hit. So it sort of gave me a different insight, where I start to sense the urgency because of this basically issues, conservation issues, all this habitat loss and zoonotic disease transmission. All these things have been communicated by scientists decades ago, but the thing is, why is it still happening and led us to this current pandemics that we're going through? This is why I start to sense the need to have a better communication strategies, science communication strategies to talk about environmental issues. So that's how I start to involve in different organizations and started my master's studies focusing on infectious disease in non-human primates. And now I'm also working in EcoKnights on this restoration, conservation, rehabilitation pillars. And yeah, basically this is the overall of my journey that I'm currently working on. So moving on to the next slide. And I always find that if we really want to start our journey in doing environmental actions, volunteerism is definitely the best way to start. So let's move to the next slide. So yeah, just a quick intro about EcoKnights. We are a non-governmental organization started 2005, which aim to encourage Malaysians to live sustainably. So let's move to the next. What I'm really, this is the pillars. We have CYV, outreach and education, RC, which is currently I'm in, and sustainability communication, which, yeah, let's move to the next one. So this is really what I'm very inclined with, of the theory of change in EcoKnights, which starting from awareness. To be honest, I think that awareness is the foundation of all. Where we want to start something, the understanding is really important to get to public on what are the needs, what are the things we need to address, and what is going on around us. And true awareness is the best way for us to engage with people, in order for them to start their actions. So let's move to the next one, please. So yeah, here's Project Vocal that I'm currently in. I started to join when I started to join EcoKnights. Project Vocal is the very first project I started in, having this things on digital advocacy and how to communicate about the importance to getting youth to be part of it. So let's move to the next one. Yeah. Also, my gallery that I really find that is really I find more easier to share my passion when through photos. So here are my collections of the human primates, dusky langur, southern pigtail macaques, and all these different beautiful wildlife in Malaysia. So let's move to the next slide. So yeah, here are the environmental issues back then, starting from Sabah, when I realized the pollution going on, the deforestation. I think most people, most of us always learn that ecosystem work alone, like marine is marine and land is land. But I think it's really important for us to let people know the importance that they are all interconnected. So when one thing happens to this ecosystem, it will eventually affect the entire ecosystem. So this is why we have to get the understanding there. So let's move to the next one. So yeah, so here's my approach. My approach is always science communication and advocacy. This is something that I'm starting to tap into, starting to learn from different organizations. Yeah, how effective science communication is really important in the policy-making process, because science helps to provide a more informed solutions, and also, yeah, let's move to the next one. Having a more evidence-based assessment. So here are the things on education, and you have to create effective and lasting policies that's actually bringing in many different perspectives together to work on that particular issues, and also advocate your side of the stories. Because for me, I think science communications comes in so many ways with this technology era. Everything starts to show that we can do so much more. Science communication isn't necessary to be through journal publication, but now we can do it through social media, writing, and also sharing verbal communications. And there are so many ways to continue to do that. Yeah, let's move to the next one. Yep, so here's a call to action to share with the youth out there how you can actually get involved in the climate agenda. So what you can do, first thing is communicate, support, and practice. So let's move on to the next one. Yep, I always find that talking to people about the issues going on is actually really helps us to spark conversations, and yeah, try to find people that are like-minded and share about the things going on in your community, and basically initiate conversations on environmental issues, talk about them. Yeah, there might be, I mean, because we do not just come in one voice. Basically, everyone comes from different perspectives. They have different experience. This is how we actually talk together and contribute to the solution. So yeah, let's move to the next one. Will be support. Yep, this is basically, I think, really important. Participate in volunteering activities, webinars, and yep, follow those environmental advocacy groups on social media. Nowadays there are a lot of social media working on all this things on certain different topics that you can actually tap onto it. So this is the chance where you get to find like-minded people. You can approach them, talk to them about the issues you are facing, and discuss what are the things that you need to talk about it. Yeah. So let's move to the next one, which is practice, live a more sustainable lifestyle, and most importantly, sustain all your efforts. Because when it comes to advocacy, it's not like a competition. You don't just do it once and you want to have that impact at that moment. It actually needs you to do on a long-term manner. So yeah. Okay, so in conclusion, let's move to the next one. Just want to let everyone here to know that you got the power to create change. Something that I always tell myself, impact starts with you. You can always make an impact. It's just a matter of whether you want to take that action. So yeah, that is all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that sharing, Celine. I'm sure our audience really appreciated that you shared the call to action on how to go about with climate action. Thank you so much for that. So moving on to the next segment of our event, we'll be having a panel discussion involving all of the speakers. Yeah, so I'm going to, I guess, pose the warm-up question to everyone. Feel free to answer it if you're comfortable with it. If you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to. But the first one I want to ask everyone is, do you think that there is sufficient youth involvement in the decision-making process? Yeah, it's an open-ended question, and we'd love to hear your reflections on that question. Perhaps we can start off with Dr. Renat.
For me, I think there's always an opportunity for more youth involvement, not just at roundtables, but also specifically on policy making. Definitely at a national level, I think there needs to be higher participation, right, from the youth. And I'm not just talking about urban youth, like also rural ones, like the indigenous youth communities who, live in, forested areas and are really experiencing, some of the setbacks that they are going through right now, especially with, illegal logging activities. I think their voices need to be heard at a national and perhaps even at an international agenda. Personally, that's what I would like to see more inclusivity, I think. When you talk about youth participation specifically, I think at the moment, there's a lot of youth within the Klang Valley that is involved, because I think a lot of our forums, a lot of primary-based projects that we have tend to concentrate at big city areas. But there are a lot of other youths that are sort of neglected in that process because of issues around accessibility. And some of them might not even have heard about it. We have youths who actually literally experience internet connectivity issues in this day and age. So I think we just have to be more innovative and creative to think about ways in which we can engage, everyone in the process a little bit more. So in short, like there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Renat. Perhaps Emily would like to share her thoughts on this.
Yep. I guess the first thing we need to be clear is the youth definition in Malaysia. Our age limit for youth is up to 40 years old, I believe, on the national level, but it differs for every state. I think for Selangor, they are trying to adjust it to 30 or 35. They're having this debate. I'm not sure if that's been decided. But again, so this definition itself is, I think, is a problem, because I think having youth within a wide range of age is going to limit more youth to be involved. Just imagine an 18 years old versus a 40 years old youth. There's vast difference in terms of the experience, the background, and the younger ones might feel limited or feel, less experienced compared to the elder one, and so that will affect the entire participation. But in general, I would say I agree with Dr. Renat that the participation could be enhanced, especially in the policy making sphere. Being in this government setup, I have observed. Yes, the government is also working towards being, organized more inclusive, focus group discussion or even roundtable, and it's a good sign. Although it is, I think, could be faster. And what I think is also important is the youth ourselves need to be ready for this kind of conversation. There's many circumstances where government is ready to engage with this particular group, be it the youth or be it the minorities such as the indigenous people, but they themselves might not be ready for it. So there is a communication and education gap in there. So I think while we fight for more youth participation in this policy making sphere, we need to also educate ourselves. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for that sharing, Emily. And Celine, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm actually really agree with what Dr. Renat said earlier about looking for opportunities. Basically, nowadays there are a lot of opportunities available that we can tap on. We can try to look for it, and it really there start to be a lot of. From my experiences, I try to look for ways that can have they are more inclusive. They start to have youth youth in the agenda. They start to hear from want to have youth to be part of this whole process. Especially nowadays, I'm also more involved in different science conferences, and I really am very inclined when they have this youth wanting to include youth to be part of this. So and also I want to add is I think it's really important to everyone to have this equitable sharing of information, the resources, and also the accessibility. I think somehow we are going towards that direction, but we need to, we definitely need to move more and continue to be consistent in this kind of efforts. Yep, that's from me.
Yeah, thank you so much for that sharing, Celine. And yeah, I guess the takeaway message I got from this question is one of accessibility as well as one of inclusivity. But as Emily also mentioned, once we do have these sort of opportunities, how are we to ensure that we make the most of it? But perhaps that's for another discussion. So moving on to the next question, I'd like to also pose this to everyone, to all of our panelists. Why is it important for there to be inclusion of youth, especially young women and girls, indigenous groups and minority groups in the decision-making process in the context of COVID-19 and in general? Dr. Renat, I understand you mentioned points related to inclusivity, so I'm wondering if you'd like to expand it here.
Yeah, sure, Shakib. I think first and foremost, diversity is definitely power. When people talk about diversity, what does that mean is that you're able to offer up a different perspective based on your own set of experiences, based on your own education, based on the background or your own personal observations. And there is power and value in that. A lot of us have something that we call selective biases, because we tend to look at things like through our own lens, and we don't really empathize enough. We don't put ourselves in the shoes of other people. And in the context that you've brought up, especially women and girls, especially, they are actually one of the most vulnerable communities that have been impacted, by climate change. And once again, there are tons of studies that have been conducted in developing countries. And unfortunately, a lot of this group of demographic don't really have a voice on the table. And when that happens, a lot of decisions, a lot of policies that are being drafted tends to ignore their needs, which is a huge problem. Because, going back to that whole debate, that whole argument about how do we be more inclusive, but it also leads to this question of why do we need to be inclusive? Because we need systemic policies, right, that addresses the needs of every single stakeholder, which is very much in line with, the spirit of what the Sustainable Development Goals are, right, of not leaving anyone behind. You can have all of these beautiful goals that have been set, 17 goals, 169 targets. You can shout all about how 193, member state countries have decided to back this up and champion it. But the reality on the ground is that until you have included, every single stakeholder in these dialogues, in these roundtables, in these discussions, until you have policies that truly address their concerns, their needs, the goals that you have, right, won't be realized, so to speak.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Before I add in my thoughts to that, perhaps we could get some input from Emily as well as Celine. So Emily, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
This is regarding why it's important to include these minority vulnerable groups in the process, right? Talking about in this climate change perspective, I would say climate change is complex and it impacts many of us very differently. Even among the youth, it affects the urban youth and the rural youth differently, even among the gender as well, rural, urban, very different. Like the people in the rural might have less access to, internet, and that will, stop them from getting the latest weather information, for example, and that is gonna, delay their preparation for flood, for example. So that is the exact reason why we need to be inclusive. And a lot of times, policymakers might be a bit too comfortable in their, cubicle, attending this round table. I know it doesn't sound good coming from me, but I mean, let's face it, it might be the problem in Malaysia or even for other countries. So the policymakers, it is not their fault, because the nature of a job is, really to draft the policy, a lot of black and whites, and that is where stakeholder engagement is important. So of course, we would need various mobilization to make them realize that, hey, you should include this group, why, and so on. So I would say, yes, it is important, and I can't stress more enough that the group that is ready needs to be ready to be engaged. Yeah, thank you.
Emily. And Celine, what about yours?
Yeah, I'm actually just gonna add that it's really important to ensure there's this equal representation of different communities, not just there's women, youth, indigenous people, coastal communities, and those low-income groups, and many more different groups that to be part of this environmental policy making. And what I also want to add is from what Emily shared just now is on the importance of stakeholder engagement, because that's how we try to link the gap together and come up with an approaches to be a holistic approaches that can actually address those impacts that are experiencing from different groups based on different demography and all these factors coming in together. So yeah, I think that's my overall take for this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then, I generally agree with the sentiment. The fact of the matter is, for young people, the climate crisis, if not now, will be affecting us in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And it's important that these policies which are formulated address the needs of these communities. Thank you everyone for your sharing on that. So moving on to the third question, it's a bit more youth-centric, youth-oriented. So I'd like to hear on Celine's perspective, actually. Could you share with us more on how Malaysian youth have contributed their voice and climate action in your respective organization as well as your role? I'm actually also curious to hear about Emily's perspective. I understand you're no longer involved with MYD, Emily, but back then, perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, how do you perceive this? Perhaps we could start off with Celine.
Yeah, I think we start to have this climate environmental topics going on among youth, because they start to, we become that generation that grows up with that kind of impacts. That's why it really relates to us. So we want to take actions, making change. And the one thing that I started was with Project Vocal, and how I realized that your voice can actually contribute to make a change. So eventually it opens up to many different opportunities, getting engaged with like-minded individuals, and there's also environmental advocates that share different insights from what they're experiencing. And earlier this year, I was in this IUCN Global Youth Summit. Basically, I volunteered in there. I represented Malaysia as the only Mandarin facilitator, because that's like my mother tongue. So it was the first time having that kind of conversations with different on an international platform. Basically, what we had from this Global Youth Summit is we managed to come up with the outcome statement about youth voices, and from there we get to see there are a lot of topics that we have never discussed, and we get to see these topics just come forefront, knowing that how climate change and all these human actions that contributed to these issues around us and impacted them in so many ways. And what really inspired me is how this outcomes will eventually be delivered to this IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, that's the short for that, the Conservation Congress, and be part of this, contributing to the action framework for Convention of Biological Diversity. Basically, it's just showing that how important is youth voices to be part of this agenda, working on this globally on a joint effort. So yeah, that's basically my sharing.
Yeah, thanks for that, Celine. And what about yourself, Emily? Are you generally agreeable with the points Celine mentioned, or was it different for yourself from 5 years ago?
I mean, now I sounds old talking about this. I mean, it's great to hear from Celine or even the younger ones how inspired are they, building on maybe my generation or even the previous one I've built. I would say back then when I started, I feel very pleased to actually find MYD or the sister organization of it, the Power Shift Malaysia, because they are one of the pioneer in Malaysia that is a youth organization which focus on environment and climate change. And it was really glad to find them, and I have learned so much throughout my journey with them. And over the years, I would say the biggest change is I've seen more youth-led organization, be it environmental centric one or be it just youth organization, but they have started to integrate environmental and climate change agenda within their portfolio. So it's very inspiring to see that change, and it is happening very, very quickly. So that's definitely one key thing that I observe. And secondly, I would say on the government side, things have also changed. When I started this journey, I don't think they have been very active in including youth in all this consultation. But this few years, I have seen they have started to include youth organizations like MYD or even other climate action and so on in all the stakeholder engagement sessions, and even to participate in the some of the steering committee meetings. So I think that has never happened before, unprecedented. So definitely a good sign, and we need to up our game in a non-invasive way, I would say. Because it depends on the government as well, or even the stakeholders that you deal with, what kind of approach is suitable to be more constructive in terms of engaging them. So whichever work. But I think in Malaysia, we definitely need a more non-invasive way, and also friendly approach if you want to really get things done quickly. Yeah, thank you.
But just to clarify, what do you? I'm wondering what you mean by invasive. This is not.
Sometimes NGOs might appear to be very extreme. Telling be it government or any companies that, hey, you shouldn't do this. It is probably the same message. They are right, but probably the way they convey it might make the recipient feel very defensive and so on. So it might defeat the entire purpose of pushing for a good decision. So I think approach itself is very important if you really, really want to solve things fast. Yeah, that's my view, but anyone feel free to discuss about it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily. And yeah, that's something I definitely resonate with. I think it's important for anyone and everyone to enter a piece of negotiation or discussion in good faith. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for things to move forward. So moving on to the next question. This is something I'd like to perhaps get a bit of insight from Emily as well as Dr. Renat. From both of your observations, what are some of the current environmental and even socio-economic issues that the youth are most interested in? Do you think we need more focus on certain other issues in terms of youth involvement? And perhaps I could just follow up with Emily, because you mentioned that you were part of a previous generation, and now you're experiencing, I guess, another generation of youth involvement. So do you see any differences in interests of young people? Perhaps we could get
even in the youth spectrum, there's like different age categories. So I'm experiencing it differently right now. I would say it's different. I mean, coming from my personal perspective, my peers who have been in MYD now have been working full-time in the sphere, including you yourself, Shakil. So that's the first thing that have changed, in a sense that there are more job opportunities, paid job for the youth to work in environmental and climate change sphere. So it's very pleased to also see that changes. And secondly, I think what youth should be focusing on, I think it still draws back to personal inclination. I would always advise people who wanted to start anything to just think from their personal perspective first. What problem or environmental issues they have observed around them, what concerns them the most, and that should be the first thing they start to focus, because environment and climate change is such a huge and complex issue. So you need to find one starting point. It can be, just the single-use plastic issue around you whenever you go shopping. It could be also, not enough pedestrian walk for the people to go low carbon mobility. So you don't need to solve the entire thing, but start small. So I would say I wouldn't recommend any environmental issues they should be focusing on. Just start from your personal perspective. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Emily. And Dr. Renat, what about yourself? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I think one of the major shifts that I've certainly witnessed in the past couple of years is startups and eco-entrepreneurship. Like, it's literally flourished. And this is just me, right? Observing maybe a decade long of radical shift. I've seen youth, in the earlier decades where, they're very vocal, they talk about, advocacy, trying to raise awareness about why climate change is such a pertinent issue that needs to, be looked at on why we deserve to give it the attention that it deserves. So what I would say is that there are those years, right, that ask, tough, important, pertinent questions. And then there are years that find answers to that. And I think we are living in a decade of action. So I'm certainly seeing a flourishment, right, of quite a number of startups, to be honest. Like, they've actually approached me saying that, Dr. Renard, can you actually be our advisor for, an electric motorbike charging station that, we have developed or designed. The pace might be slow, or there might be a lot of competition and threats, but we view that this is the future. Just last week I was mentoring a group of 15 years old that is working actually with the American Chemical Society Association to develop batteries that can dissolve. 15-year-olds. I mean, I was just completely mind blown. I was like, what was I doing when I was 15-year-old? Probably just studying to pass, PMR exams. And here they are doing this pitch, 5 minutes pitch, and it completely blew my mind, right? I was like, wow, for them to get to that stage, to have mentors, to get the right people that they can work with, and they spoke like, true experts, like they knew what they were getting themselves into, which shocked me, to be honest. And I felt that, wow, the world has literally changed. And I'm really seeing youth, right, coming up with all of this different, innovative solutions, plugging in the gaps where they need to be plugged, as it should be. And to be honest, I'm just excited about, seeing what the next decade would bring. Because the 15-year-olds can deliver such, solutions. Wow, can you imagine? Like, in the next decade or so, right? I'm just so excited about the potential, of different youth groups.
Thanks for that, Dr. Ran. And I guess the quick follow-up to that is, you've been involved with within the startup scene and as well as the entrepreneurship scene. How vital do you see this industry in pushing for climate action, I guess, compared to government regulations, for instance?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, you need a whole ecosystem, right, to be connected, right? Because it's this realization that, the problems that we face are interconnected, but so much are solutions, right? So you need both parties to work on this while waiting on governmental policies, which might take a very, very long time, right, for them to enact and debate about it in Parliament. There needs to be action because we cannot afford to waste time. So a lot of the solutions that have surfaced, right, serves to address that. They're constantly, coming up with new disruptive technologies because they feel that there is just no time for them to waste. If they were to wait for another decade to pass before a climate law can be passed, right? where it stresses on the need for climate action, it would be too late by then. Like, how many more people would need to be sacrificed? How many more people would have to go through, flood events, wildfires, or even severe droughts that affect agriculture products? We can't wait. I think the key point here is that the climate crisis is the defining issue of our generation, and we just have to get started on it. There's simply no time to waste.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, just looking at the time we have, we are actually almost towards the end of our panel discussion. But I'd like to ask perhaps one or two more questions to everyone before we end. I'm actually particularly interested about your experiences, Dr. Renat, from the several international conferences that you've been a part of, roundtable meetings and discussions. But I'd like to, perhaps in a minute, I was wondering if you could share more about these experiences and what people who are interested to be part of the decision-making process can generally expect.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say very shortly is that don't be afraid to be heard. One of the things that Emily was saying is that, some youths may feel like they're not ready, but you have to get started somewhere, which was the journey that I took. I wasn't afraid to engage, right, with pioneers who are experts in, say, climate finance, for example. So in all of these working groups that I'm in, at least at an international level with the World Economic Forum, they're talking about engaging with CEOs from, some of the top banks like HSBC, the CEO of Google, for example, and they have such vast experiences, right, in their fields. But at the same time, right, we have to engage with them to see how we can actually leverage on their resources so that we can partner with them to create more effective collaborations. And I think for me, that has always been the tone that I've sort of adopted, or rather the principle that I've adopted when engaging with them. I think trying to reach a mutual goal through different collaborative partnerships. And maybe if I can just add on very quickly, I think perspective is very important. So a lot of people ask whether, I look at a glass, right, as half full or half empty. I tell them that they're totally missing the point. The fact that you can always refill a glass with all different sorts of, like beverages, water, juices, and so on and so forth, shows that there is always an opportunity that lies right around the corner. So seize it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Renat. And Celine, I understand that you are the youngest panelist we have on this discussion, but you also seem to be very experienced and very involved in a lot of environmental initiatives. So on that note, what advice would you give to your peers who want to get involved within this scene, especially in terms of decision-making and policy processes?
Well, my advice would be explore these different opportunities available. Like look for opportunities, even if it's challenging. I mean, a lot of people try to look that pandemic is really make a huge turning point. Like a really we are currently in this kind of situation. People find that it's hardly even possible to think about environmental issue, but the thing is, we really need to talk about environmental issues, like continue for our efforts. And my advice is not just looking for opportunities, but also challenge yourself, find your niche in that different area. It's not just you have to be someone that has studied that certain kind of, have that kind of background, then you can be part of environmental policy. You can actually be there really needs to be more different backgrounds to be part of this in order to share your voice. Yeah. So I think that's what I want to say. That don't be afraid. Really, I think I have get more rejections than the opportunities that I get. So basically, just keep trying and be positive, and look for ways to play a role. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Celine. Just, I guess a very quick note on that. You mentioned it's important for people who do not come from the environmental background to be a part of this as well. So if you could sort of, give some bit of advice for people who are not so familiar with the scene, what advice would you give to them very quickly?
Oh yeah, I would say, like, when you start to experience the impacts around you, basically the environment issues, we are in the environment. I mean, okay, sorry, let me rephrase again. So basically we are all, it's really important for us to know we all have that role to play in when it comes to this environment, because the whole planet is the decision is with us. And when temperature increases, it's not just the efforts from researchers, NGOs to be part of to work on this restoration effort, but we can all really come up with our own, be creative, come up with our own ways to contribute to that. And what I want to say is, be creative, look for ways that you can participate, engage in environmental initiative. You don't have to be really expert in that having that kind of certificate and expert to work on environmental issues. So yeah, it's really about how you make a decision, be more informed, and also I think earlier Emily said that you have to have this focus. You have to have, from your own perspective, you have to have that thing that you want to focus on. What are the issues you want to focus on? And from there, you do your research, and that's how you start your journey. Yeah.
Thanks for that sharing, Celine. And I guess the final question before we go on to closing remarks, and this is a question I'd like to pose to Emily, because, you know, Emily, you've gone through that shift of I guess youth movements from one generation to another, so it's interesting to understand your perspective. But, you know, taking into account that shift, what are some of the barriers that young people have faced in terms of getting involved within this scene? Has there been any difference from your perspective over the shift in youth movements you've had exposure to? Perhaps we can get that answered in a minute or so.
All right, thank you, Shakil, for the question. You're making me feeling old again.
You're not.
No, just kidding. That's fine. I think challenges. Last time when we started, I think the challenges is definitely to engage with the governmental stakeholders, because they're pretty new to this new group of stakeholders. They don't know what we want. They don't know why we're here. Why are this youth making noise? You know, but things have changed. Now they're very receptive, and it's a good sign, I think. They have gradually realized the importance of youth being part of the process. And secondly, I would say, like Dr. Renat pointed out, the quality of youth movement have also improved tremendously over the years. Previously, probably because it was in the beginning of the movement, so everything is still very scattered, and not many people are well versed in this, and probably by back then SDG is still, and also Paris Agreement is not as widely spoken as today. So now that even people people that is not from the environmental background, as pointed out by Shakil and Celine, people not from this background are also, you know, start to jump into this bandwagon. And that's not a bad thing. That's entirely great. And I think that's the key shift that I have seen across these few years. Yeah, thank you.
So definitely. And for the audience's clarification, everyone here are still young youth, so I did not mean to put you on the spot, Emily.
I'm fine, don't worry. Yeah.
Okay, yes. Final remarks from everyone, and perhaps we could get something within 30 seconds. Overall, what do you think is the role of youth in the decision-making process? Dr. Renat, you started off the discussion. Perhaps you'd like to start off with the closing remarks within 20 to 50 seconds.
Yeah, no pressure. I would say seize the opportunity. So don't be afraid of failure. I think there's really two perspectives here, right? You can either fail and run away, or you can fall and keep rising. And I think that should be the mentality moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Renan. Celine, what about yourself?
Okay, so basically, what I want to share is we try to look for the good things at what we can do. We learn a huge lessons from these pandemics, and we cannot live how we used to live, that kind of norm that we once have, and we actually have to be we have to work together and come up with more holistic approaches to work on environmental issues, biodiversity, all these things, and work together from different point of view, bringing those injustice issues come to forefront when it comes to environmental policy making process. So yeah, what I want to say is it's really important for everyone to raise up the issues that they are going on, and again also adding to Dr. Renat, don't be afraid, just keep trying. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's from me.
Last but not least, Emily, very quickly, what would be your final remarks?
Yeah, I think don't be afraid is a constant message, and I need to resonate that very much. Don't be afraid to reach out, because the circle is really small. You can just identify what you really want to tackle first, start small, and by then you will understand your strength and leverage on it, and start to mingle with key stakeholders. Find a mentor to guide you throughout this journey. Dr. Renat could be the really good mentor. For example, even Celine is also been mentoring people. Yeah, and I think one thing I would like to talk about is mobilizing politicians. Yeah, I think we have a lot of volunteerism in Malaysia, which is great. But in Malaysia, I think in many countries as well, political will still is very important. So if you want environmental and climate change to be high on the national agenda, you should start talking to your adun, to your MPs about it, and that will make things even faster. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Emily. That final point is something that I really resonate with, and political will is very critical in pushing for climate action. Yes, we have reached towards the end of our panel discussion. Once again, thank you very, very much to all our panelists. It has been a very insightful and then very informative session, and I'm sure the audience has learned a lot from this session. So moving on, we will have our Q&A segment that will be commencing in a bit. And I would like to remind the participants to send in your questions via the chat box, which will be addressed by the speakers. Thank you so much, everyone, for that. All right. Once again, thank you so much, everyone, for staying over. We'll proceed with the first question, if I may. Looks like we've got quite an array of questions, quite tough ones, I may say. All right. So just like at the start, I think I'll have this as a warm-up question. So what resources or supporting factors are available for youth-led sustainable business in Asia? So I think this is a bit of a niche question, and feel free for anyone to have an attempt. But perhaps I'd like to direct this to Dr. Renat based on his experiences with entrepreneurship. Dr. Renat, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure, Shaki. And thank you very much for this question. I think there are multiple resources that youth can potentially reach on. One particular trend that I've been seeing is actually the support that we have for social or eco enterprises that have been surfacing, well, at least in Malaysia. So if you have an idea that you think would help, save the environment or have a positive impact, I think it might be worth sort of consolidating that and thinking about its business proposition. There's also a lot of help in terms of potential mentorships that you can get support from as well. Of course, I have to mention Project Vocal. It's a platform where you can obviously, launch or throw out different ideas in terms of how you might want to support, an environmental project or climate advocacy. That's an area that you're interested in. A lot of room for mentorship, guidance from more experienced people. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks for that, Dr. Renat.
Can I add a little bit?
Yep. Go on, Emily.
Hi, everybody. So just to clarify, actually today I am speaking on my personal capacity. not representing MGTC. To add on to Dr. Renat's point, I think I would like to shout out a little bit on this Jago program, which is run by MGTC. Yes, I'm not representing them today, but I think it is something that is relevant to youth who want to venture into green business, because we are also trying to train more entrepreneurs to be self-sustained. So if you're interested to venture into this, you can go to Jago MGTC Instagram. It is actually Jana Graduan Usahawan Hijau. So basically trainings will be provided to unemployed or underemployed graduates for you to be an entrepreneur, to sell green products and so on. Yeah, so I think that's a form of support that is available from the government end as well. Thank you.
Right. So moving on to the next question, Celine, I'd love to get some of your inputs for this. So how far have youths contributed towards climate awareness, especially in designing the policies for the country in Malaysia? Perhaps you could share some of your insights with regards to this question.
Yeah, I would love to. Thanks for the question. So basically, I think that nowadays we can see how resilient youth have been, like trying to be creative and utilizing what are the resources, and how bringing in technology to this climate actions, sharing more awareness to public. And yeah, there are a lot of resources that they've been focusing on. Basically, we have a lot of groups around, and they just emerged. When I think we can see it more prominent when the pandemic starts, people start to switch to digital, and then as time goes, they start to involve more people, and we really get to see they coming from different point of view, and that's really great. Which is how we get to address the challenges going on from different perspectives, and this is why I think that we are actually on the track. That's why it's really important for the getting more youths to be part of this process, and addressing this communication gap, and embedding them into different stages in this decision making process. Yeah, that's my share on that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Celine. And I guess just a quick disclaimer. So based on the collaterals, it's mentioned that I am a focal point of MYD. So I just wanted to clarify that I am the former focal point of MYD in case anyone gets confused. But yeah, going on to the next question. Excuse me. Advocacy work is hard and requires persistent mentality, especially when the work you do sometimes is being met with resistance by the naysayers. What is your important on this? How do you work around this, and to manage burnout too? So this is a question I would like to pose to everyone. So perhaps maybe Dr. Renat, you could start off with this if you have any opinions.
Sure. I think, advocacy work will always face resistance. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this space to begin with. When you want to push for something new, that's inventive, that you feel very passionately in your heart, that it's something that's going to bring about change, there is always going to be some sort of inertia, like at the start. But it also speaks volume to how important the work is. If it was so easy to enact change, right, then, there's not much of significance, I would say, to a certain extent in terms of your work. But what I would say, throughout my experience is relying on actually a strong support network of peers, of colleagues, so that you don't experience that, so-called burnout that, you've been hearing about a lot, actually, especially in the Olympics and sports. I think like just today, or was it yesterday, where Simone Biles like literally said that she's pulling out because of this mental stress that she's experiencing, and it's okay. I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, but always know who are people that you can fall back to for advice, know where their key strengths are, and know that you have. Always know who your safety net is. If you were to fall, right, who are the people that you can rely on, right, for support? And for me, I think that has been absolutely crucial. not just for advocacy work, but any work I think in this space, which can be challenging.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Renan. Emily?
Thank you for the question. I think I have to resonate with Dr. Renat a lot. And also being in this field, you see a lot of negative news because climate risk and impact is always negative. So that adds on to the burnout part. I won't deny that I have burnout before, not once, many times. It's not easy and it's unavoidable, but it is a form of push for you to move forward as well. Yes, you might need to take a break, but having your me time and all, after that you feel more recharged to return. And I think how to go about this is always you always go back to why you started. Always go back to your very personal motivation, and find back the very initial spark that make you wanted to start on this journey, because advocacy, especially in this field, takes many years, especially on policy itself. Policy takes many years as well to form, to actually happen. So I think, stay true to yourself is very important. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily. And yourself, Celine?
Yeah, I think I really like this question because I can relate it, and how what Emily and Dr. Renat shared. I mean, definitely agree with that, because it really happens and it's inevitable, because you really get those criticism and overwhelming information going on, and eventually you will face burnout. And yeah, I think this is just add on from what Emily said earlier. Like, you go back to the most basic point, like, why did you start it at the first place? That's the whole motive. That's what when it happens to me, I'll go back, like, why did I start this? Why do I want to work on this? Choose that. Think back. Why did you start it? And also, how it makes you want to keep on moving for advocacy, because it's not a one-time thing. You just have to keep on being consistent, and if you meet any obstacles, just be creative, look for more ways to go around, and then move on from criticism. Is if there's any if they are useful, just take into consideration. Those are lessons, and also in your experience, you will actually take this as an experience, because at the very end you will actually realize that what did I want to I think it's ultimately that's how you keep moving on. You have the strong support system, find like-minded people. It's not just in your field. You can actually find that different people, they share the same mind as you, and that's how you keep moving forward. Yeah, that's from me.
Excuse me. Yeah, thanks so much for that, Celine. And being in the field myself, I cannot deny the importance of having a strong support system. To keep on going in this field, and any field, as Dr. Renat mentioned. I'm conscious of time, so I also note that we've got a lot of very very brilliant questions here. So I'll try to focus on be a bit more focused. Yeah. So the next question is also something I would like to extend to the whole floor. What are the tips for youth in engaging with different key actors to have constructive feedback and actions in policymaking? Emily, you mentioned of invasive methods. It can be challenging as different key actors to have different understanding and ideas. So perhaps we could start off with Emily before we go on to Dr. Renat and then back to Celine.
I think it's never easy communicating, and I think language is actually very important. What I mean is not just the way you express yourself, but also Bahasa Malaysia. I think it has been very neglected. We are here speaking in English, but don't forget, if you want to make a change or be directly involved with policymakers in Malaysia, you have to up your Bahasa game. Because all the official documents, plans, and even sessions, sometimes formal stakeholder consultation sessions are all conducted in Bahasa. So that is something that I think I would recommend everyone to actually work on. Start reading, official documents in the national language, and familiarize yourself with the words. Yeah. And secondly, I think it also depends on the nature of your issue. If you're talking to local authorities, you need to speak their language. If you're talking to the federal ministries, they also talk very different language. So I think what is helpful is try to attend any public session that they open up to the public. Understand what are the normal way of them engaging with the public, or you can also learn from the more experienced environmental NGOs, like WWF, SETDEM, and so on. They have been in this field for many years. They have attended so many formal engagement sessions with the government. So you can shadow them and try to learn how they have been, communicating and engaging with the authorities. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily. Dr. Rana?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I will keep it short and simple. I'll just probably say, equip yourself with, as much knowledge as possible. And also try to pick up and learn different tools that are out there. What has been really interesting, I suppose, in the sustainability and climate change space is that there is just so much to learn, from climate financing to, biodiversity policy to actually reading, hundreds of pages of the IPCC report in terms of trying to understand what some of the key experts are actually talking about. Having that level of understanding is important if you want to be able to make substantial contributions at a policy-making roundtable. It's not as easy as just showing up and just saying that, yeah, you feel passionately about an issue, or you feel passionately about why we're not acting on a certain issue, but what is your proposal, your solution to actually address that? And I think for me, that is actually the most important part. It's not just awareness, but converting awareness into action, something that people can take off with them and implement. I think that has always been the missing piece, I think, in the jigsaw puzzle that needs to be really focused on.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Renan. And yourself, Celine?
I definitely want to add on from what Dr. Renat said, like addressing the missing piece. So basically, I think it's really important that getting used to first of all, be assertive when you talk about climate change, climate actions. Like you have to understand what you're doing, and that's how you kind of understand what is going on. And you have to make sure everyone is put into the same frame of mind, like everyone understand what's going on, and yeah. Eventually they will realize that all these different stakeholders, different groups, they are overlapping somehow. We don't work in silo. We need to work together in order to create a change throughout this policy making process and all these environmental actions. So yeah, that's from.
Yeah, thanks for that, Celine. And there's an interesting question which I would like to ask you actually. One moment, yeah. Right. So in the age of information and social media, do you think most youths are still just talking about making a change and then actually making their own initiatives to lead changes? So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Actually, I think that about this. To be really honest, I have been seeing that there are a lot of youth that stood up, understanding what's going on. Most of them, when they start to voice out, that's how they address the issues happening around them. And from there, I can see that there are a lot of startups coming on, especially focusing on green, or this environmental field, sustainability field, this social entrepreneurship, which I think that there's actually a way for them to starting to take their own initiative, because they start to understand that they can actually contribute, which is what I realized, that the younger generations are getting more creative in working on creative solutions, addressing climate change issues, and environmental policy, identifying the importance and their roles in it. So yeah, I think that they are on most of the younger generation. They are on that track, moving forward. So we just need to keep on making it consistent. Everyone knowing what's going on, and keep moving.
Yeah, thanks for that, Celine. And I hope I didn't put you too much on the spot. Right. So this is a question I'd like to ask Emily. Just again taking into account the whole shift in generation as far as youth are concerned. I'm actually curious to know your thoughts on how you think youth ages 18 to 23, in hindsight, can influence policies in a country that's a bit resistant, to having progressive climate policies?
First of all, I think we shouldn't constrain ourselves with the age bracket. Because nowadays, on the point of social media and information, there's so many things that you can search and self-learn. So age to me is really not a limitation. Yeah, that's number one. And secondly, I think sadly we're looking at the system that is getting really not so inclusive sometimes with this new government. But I think we just have to work around it. You can mobilize through your personal capacity, like I have mentioned on, just talk to your MPs and ADUNs, because they will help to make your voice louder. And to me, that is something that everybody can do regardless of your age. And they being your representative, they should listen to you, in fact. And that is a way for you to informally have your voice be included in the system. So we have to look beyond, using formal platforms to actually get yourself heard. There's a lot of way to informally mobilize from the community level up to the political level. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Emily. And a question for Dr. Renat. I guess it's a bit similar, but going a bit more in depth. From your observation, what do you think about Malaysian youth in terms of their willingness and contribution towards climate action? Are they on the right track? As well as, can you see them, how can or shall we support them to see tangible results in climate advocacy?
Terry, just to be completely honest, I think that's quite a broad spectrum of youths, and it's very difficult to sort of put all of them into one basket, so to speak, and say that, yeah, all of them are, really gung-ho and initiated. I think there is a wide spectrum of youths that I have engaged with. Yeah, I mean, on one end of the spectrum, you have your Emilys, your Celines, who are, full on, 100% committed and dedicated to the cause of what they're doing, like they're key advocates, like they, even in their day-to-day conversations with people, they try to change you and say, hey, why are you holding a plastic bag, for example? Maybe it's time to change that. And then all the way down to the end of the other end of the spectrum, you have people who just couldn't care less, right? You have youths who are just, oh yeah, like the world is coming to an end. We're probably going to exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius, like limit anyways. So why bother engaging in this? On that front, I would say that for me, at least the youth that I'm engaged with tend to lean towards the more positive side of things. But I would say that there is a shift here in Malaysia. Like in the past, we would say like 10, maybe a decade ago, to see youth, right, sitting on policy tables, right, to voice out their opinions was completely rare, like, or really unheard of. But these days, in this day and age, right, we're seeing that change. Even if it's not initiated, right, from the powers that would be, the youth groups themselves are actually, like campaigning through various digital social media. They're making their voices heard, and they're saying that they want to be included, right, on the table. They want to have a seat at the table to help influence that policy change. And for me, I think I sort of draw inspiration from that, seeing that, we are making that progress. Sure, it may not be fast enough, but a progress is progress, right?
Yeah, definitely, Dr. Renat. Thanks for that. And, just like climate change negotiations, I guess, there's this principle called common but differentiated responsibility. Everyone has their own pace, everyone has their own path to take in this journey, as well as many other journeys. So the next question is, I guess, is as such. So Lee Kuan Yew once said that decisions have got to be made by adults, not teenagers, especially with the educational gap mentioned. What specifically can youth bring to the policy or decision-making table? Perhaps, Celine, we could get your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think, thanks for the question. I think education is very important. I think I emphasized on that many times already. And yeah, again, I really want to say that what youth can actually do is addressing what's the gap between all these different issues going on from different sides, because it's such a wide topic, and then the impacts has been occurring in this disproportionate manner. So I think what we can actually do is making sure that how education's addressing this gap. One thing is, and also they have this way to getting access of knowledge and all those informations, and that's how bringing together different voices to bring to this decision making table. Yeah.
Thanks. What about Emily? I'm curious to hear about your thoughts as well for this question.
It's about teenager not able to be a part of the process. I think
That's right.
The thing about policy, it takes years, and whatever decision is made now is going to affect us in the upcoming 20 years. So I think it's really ridiculous to not have youth in the process and not having our voice heard, because we will be the one that will be the future leader in 20 years time, and we should have a say in policy that will affect us directly in the upcoming 10 or 20 years horizon. I think there shouldn't be any barrier for us to stop us being in the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And I guess on that note, perhaps Dr. Renat, I'm most curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. Teenagers. Policy making.
No, I think just to be upfront, I don't know if Lee Kuan Yew actually said that, but if he did, right, then I would strongly disagree with him. I think it's I think in this day and age, right, you can basically seek knowledge and learn something, through e-learning, like by talking to people, through coaching, through mentoring. There's so many ways in which you can contribute in your own capacity. I mean, of course, not everyone is perfect, right? So you definitely have areas where, like you're particularly strong at. Like, for example, some people are much stronger in analytical work, for instance. So they would indulge and sort of take a deeper dive into looking at, the technical side of sustainability. But then there are also people who are, have the gift of the gab, right? Who can argue and debate and rationalize on certain policies. I think being aware of what your key strengths are is important, because I think that's the first step in terms of trying to navigate this space. And really taking a step back and thinking about areas that you can contribute at. For me, I always believe in a form and substance. So it's not just, being an empty vessel, right? Like going and knocking on people's doors saying, yeah, you got to change, but also showing them how, right? Being able to make that argument, like, why is this important? Create that business case, and then also to show them, right? There's always going to be people who are stubborn. There's always going to be resistance at the start. But if you're able to demonstrate that your solution works at a much cheaper cost rate, more beneficial, I don't see why people would, reject your ideas.
Thanks for that, Dr. Renat. All right, moving on to the next question. Excuse me. So how would you propose for youths or youth organizations to work together to create a strong voice that can lead to impactful and real changes in our policies? So I'm curious to hear what Celine thinks about this. Perhaps you can draw on your experience from working with EcoKnights.
Yeah, actually, I think I am how I would propose is, I really think that if we are working on certain working on the cause, working on this action-based, having this action-based project, it's really important to get the message kind of work like a relay, passing down, or perhaps we can actually connect together. I would really love to see how youth organizations connect together and work progressively towards that, because again, it's like a joint effort, basically. So that's how we get the attention, of course, and also making sure that everyone is moving on the same directions together. So yeah, that's what I'm going to share.
Appreciate it, Celine. All right. Again, I'm conscious of time. I start heading towards the end of the Q&A session. We've got one or two more before we conclude. So I believe this one is somewhat a bit technical, but let's see. So given the differences in greenhouse gas emissions between Malaysia as well as developed nations. How will you convince Malaysian youth to take climate action when Malaysia should further grow its economy, and that developed nations should take greater responsibility? Again, I mentioned concept of common but differentiated responsibility, but I'm curious to hear what both Emily and Dr. Renat think about this. Perhaps Emily, you can take the floor first.
Yeah. Well, I think we are a developing country that is still allowed to emit and develop. But if you look at our NDC, we are reducing it on an intensity basis. So that allows us to have that space to actually grow and emit, but on a reduction pattern. But I think what is more important is really to focus also on the climate adaptation part. Honestly, we are all already been hit by the climate impact, flooding and inconsistent rainfalls and so on. So I think there's many more things that youth could be convinced to take on climate action on adaptation part, besides just focusing on mitigation, because I noticed the entire narration could be a little bit, slanted towards mitigation, probably because developed countries and mainstream media has been talking about it more than adaptation. So I think we could definitely up the game in the adaptation part. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Yeah, definitely agree that, as much as there is emphasis on cutting down greenhouse gas emissions, as developing countries, adaptation is so important for us, because a lot of us are already facing the devastating effects of the climate crisis. Dr. Renat, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, there is a misconception, well, at least from my perspective, that, to achieve economic growth, you have to sacrifice the environment. I think it's a mindset shift that needs to change. And we've certainly seen, right, like a lot of proposals, right, around things like the Green New Deal, right, in the US. In fact, I actually wrote an article, right, in the ASEAN Post that ASEAN countries actually need to move towards that sort of policies that sort of spur in a green economy as well. And one of my asks, right, was for governments in ASEAN, instead of focusing on just, recovery, they actually need to have a reset in thinking, right, by really pumping in new investments in, things like solar, creating new jobs in this space, building up capacity in this area, because the world, as it is, like, it's going to be green or nothing in the future. This is always a fundamental belief that, I think a lot of people in the sustainability space knows, like, there is a limit to growth. There is a limit to how much you can actually extract from the environment. And if we don't change the way that, we operate, we are going to lose out one of these days. And mind you, Malaysia is one of the 12 most mega diverse countries in the world. In terms of resources, like, we are rich, but it's also with this, right, comes great responsibility. Are we just going to continue cutting down, our forests and selling them as it is? Or are we going to protect it, right, for future generations to come? So this is a key question that I think is worth, really contemplating and really, really reflecting on. Because if you want to have a future, if you want to make sure that, Malaysia continues to sustain itself, like, we have got to, really change our ways in terms of how we operate. And I don't think there's, a plan B to this. Like, it's literally just, you have to stick to plan A. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Dr. Renat. I definitely resonate with the whole, shift in mindset, because, the fact of the matter is we cannot continue looking at, economic development and environmental protection as two separate things. They should be hand in hand. And the fact of the matter is they can go hand in hand. It's important for us to start looking at it that way. All right. So perhaps one final question for the panelists. Excuse me. What are some of the political barriers that youth may face in the efforts towards climate change adaptation? Earlier on, Emily mentioned, that climate efforts have been focusing on, mitigation. But as far as adaptation is concerned, from your respective perspectives, what challenges do you foresee us pushing for that? Perhaps we could start off with Emily.
Yep. I wouldn't say just political barrier, but in general, adaptation measure will face a localized challenge, meaning that it's very hard to have a one-size framework from a national level that will fit every locality issue, because every city or even every village will be affected by all type of climate risk very differently. So that is kind of a political barrier as well. How a national adaptation plan would actually get cascaded to a localized level. So that's one thing that I think is very important for maybe youth on a localized level. You can start to observe and propose viable solutions on adaptation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Dr. Rad, before do you have any final thoughts on this? Or anything you'd like to add to this question?
Yeah, I think I have similar thoughts as Emily as well. I don't think that it's necessarily just, like political barriers, but perhaps thinking about, core solutions, like, how do you actually create solutions that not just address the mitigation aspects of climate change, but also adaptation as well, right? And I think there are different studies that have shown that, for example, focusing on mangrove restoration and planting, for example, would be able to help address both. So I think we need more core solutions like this. But I think one aspect that, has not been, I guess, touched on quite a fair bit, right, is actually the role of technology or artificial intelligence in this. I think we're merely scraping the surface in terms of trying to understand the potential of this. And once again, I've actually started this initiative called the AI Future Lab, focusing specifically on the potential of green tech, to really accelerate our growth in this area. And I'm quite happy to have a chat with anyone, maybe after this can connect with me on social media, and we can have, further discussions on this if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Dr. Ronan. Thank you for that. And we have reached towards the end of our session, but we've actually just got one more question that came in. Perhaps Celine, you'd like to take this. So how can youth refocus the attention of both the politicians and the public on climate change, especially given the current uncertainties within this country, from a financial perspective, health-related perspective, as well as political perspective?
Yeah, definitely. But what I would want to say is there's this concept called One Health, which is the importance of that, knowing that humans, animals, environmental health, ecosystem, we are all interconnected. So this is why all of this, we have to start knowing the decisions that we've made, how we're going to live, even that we are currently facing that different, the current state of affairs is still not so well, such as the politics, finance, and the pandemics, everything. But still, it's really important to move together without stopping any actions that we have been doing earlier. I mean, just keep it consistent and making sure everyone is on the same direction, because after all, it's the environmental health is important. It's the planet that we want to be living on for, and also living for our future generations. So yeah, I think it's ultimately we have to make sure that the ecosystems are healthy, and it really depends on what our decision today. So
yeah, thanks so much, Celine. It was a brilliant session by all of our panelists, and I'm sad to say that we have come towards the end of our session. That's right. Yeah. So before we actually end, I would like to once again thank all of our speakers for their insightful sharing session, and thank you so much towards the audience for your very insightful questions as well as making the time to participate in this dialogue. Next up is I would like to ask for everyone to switch on their cameras for us to take a group photo, if you're comfortable with it, of course. And whilst waiting for everyone, I'd like to remind participants that you can check out and follow Project Vocal's social media. So for Instagram, it's @project.vocal. For Twitter, it's @project_vocal, as well as the website, which can be found in the chat box for more exciting updates and news as well as information. And don't forget that you yourself can also sign up to be part of Project Vocal. Yep. Once again, thank you so much for everyone in making that time. Can I just check if everyone has their camera switched on? Okay, let's just wait for a few more people. Okay, no worries then. Yep, so I guess let me just take a, oops, sorry, a quick picture from our side, seeing that no one has switched on their screen. 1, 2, 3. Yep, it's okay, just a picture from our side. But yes, once again, thank you so much for everyone, and I hope you had a wonderful session, and feel free to reach out to any of us for any further inquiries. Thank you so much.